I have two brief questions I'd like to ask, if I may.
Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone and you're watching The Daily Question. Today's question of the day: why should you read Springtime for Snowflakes? Now, Springtime for Snowflakes, or the full title actually is Springtime for Snowflakes, Social Justice and Its Postmodern Parentage, is a new book by Michael Rectenwald. Now, I'd read about Michael Rectenwald and I'd read about his book, and so I thought, well, I'd better get myself a copy and have a read. And to be honest with you, I'm really glad that I did, because this book pleasantly surprised me. There's a lot more substance to this book than what I actually expected there to be. Let me give you the opening couple of paragraphs from the first chapter to sort of set the scene. On September the 12th, 2016, I established a Twitter account with the name Deplorable NYU Prof, obviously New York University professor, and the official handle @AntiPC NYU Prof. This Twitter identity, replete with Friedrich Nietzsche avatar, represented a satirical character wielded by a self-proclaimed but anonymous NYU professor apparently gone rogue. As with all satire, the mockery was over the top, but the intended effect was serious criticism. The Twitter account allowed me to air views that I felt reluctant to issue under my real name and to render them without undue circumspection. As an NYU professor for 9 years, I had grown concerned about recent developments within NYU and academia at large. With greater frequency, screeching mobs and no platforming of speakers essentially nullified freedom of speech. Speech codes and bias reporting hotlines curtailed the expression of entire communities. On matters of gender, sexuality and identity broadly construed, whole avenues of inquiry were foreclosed on the basis of sacrosanct tenets deemed immune from scrutiny. Freedom of speech, academic freedom and freedom of inquiry were under attack and in full retreat. And basically that's sort of the jumping off point. And what happens is his identity is, well, not too long after that, is actually revealed. And then the fun ensues from that point. Now that's what I'd heard about his story, and that's what I understood this book to be about. And so what I was expecting was this was going to be Michael Rectenwald's story and account of what happened to him, plus he would add in his own critique of the ideologies, his own reasons why he thought the system was acting the way it was, sort of his take on the current state of the academic system. In actual fact, that's not what this book is at all. It's much deeper than that, and it's much more engaging and interesting than even what I had expected. Now, I'm someone who understands these issues, and I thought this was just going to be his take on it, but in actual fact, this book is largely his own personal autobiographical journey. It talks about his own story and his journey into becoming a professor. Now, the really interesting thing, and I guess the very important thing about that, is that Michael Rectenwald was actually left of centre. Not just left of centre, this guy was left of centre. This is a guy who was a Marxist at one point. This is a guy who bought into and journeyed with some of these highly regarded postmodernist thinkers. So this guy is tutored and brought up under the system. He is very much a son of postmodernism, very much someone who is shaped and tailored in that particular cauldron. And so that's what makes this book all the more interesting, because effectively he's someone who was on the inside and is now really what you might call a philosophical whistleblower, someone who has actually exposed the flaws in the very system that he was once a very committed disciple of. Now, the other interesting thing about this, and why I think this book is so good and why I think everyone should read it, is it also provides a very easily accessible explanation for a lot of the ideologies which underpin the current social justice warrior movement and have led to these problems. It's a book for someone who actually wants to get their head around why the current situation is the way that it is, and who wants to understand postmodernism, who wants to understand Marxism, who wants to know what the Frankfurt School is, etc., and who doesn't want to read entire volumes, which you could do on each of those things, but also wants to get their facts in order and wants to understand these things correctly, because he provides these very accurate explanations and histories and insights into where these various ideas came from. And so it's a really good book to read if you actually want to understand the current problems within academia, and that are now spreading out much wider than that that into the mainstream media and into the public square, and the way in which social justice has now become this movement really that is more religious in nature, more cult-like in nature, and is very much focused on this tyrannical shutting down of opposing views and this punishment and enforcing people effectively to accept the ideology or to be written off as heretics effectively within modern Western society. Now, more and more recently, I've been starting to come to this conclusion, and this book for me is sort of helping to cement this idea that I don't even think the term social justice itself has a lot of merit. Now, I'm not saying that those issues that people who care about social justice and would label them with that particular label aren't real. There aren't actual injustices in the world. I'm not saying injustice doesn't happen. No, of course it does. But the term itself is a little bit of a nonsensical term when you think about it, because surely any form of justice, or I guess on the opposing side of it, any form of injustice that is perpetrated that needs to be addressed, is going to be social in nature. So to put the term social in front of the term justice just doesn't really seem to actually make a lot of philosophical sense. The fact that justice and injustice happens in the world, it's something that can only occur within the human community, because it's only human persons who are personal moral subjects. We are the only creatures with a rational intellect and a free will. We're the only ones capable of living a moral life and also transcending our urges to choose to do the good, to be just, or giving ourselves over to those base urges and acting with injustice. So the idea that you could have justice that isn't really social doesn't really make a lot of sense, and it seems to me that the only reason this term is used now and consistently used by people is really because there's a whole other much bigger postmodernist ideology which underpins why and why this term is being used and who it's directed at. Now, I therefore would suggest that possibly we need to start considering a return to good old-fashioned vanilla justice, just justice, full stop. Is a person being treated justly, or a group of people being treated justly or unjustly in a particular situation, instead of buying into this whole concept which is already preloaded with a whole lot of postmodernist ideas, a whole lot of ideas about the human person and about reality which actually don't correspond to the truth. Either way, I'd highly recommend this book. It's well worth reading. If you want to understand the current context, you want to get your head around some of the history and the ideologies which feed this, and you want to be accurate and more correct in your understanding of these issues, you should definitely read Springtime for Snowflakes by Michael Rechtenwald. It's available at Amazon, Book Depository, and all the other usual suspects. As per usual, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know what you think in the comment section below. And if you like the content I'm creating and you'd like to see more of it, then please support me on PayPal or Patreon. There is a link for both in the video description below. That's right, I can hear my theme music too. I'll see you tomorrow on The Daily Question.